Welcome to the Deep Dive, the ultimate analytical shortcut tailored just for you. Today, we're wrestling with, well, a legendary piece of photography hardware and asking a pretty fundamental question. Can you get that unique look of the 90s Hasselblad Xpan camera, that amazing panoramic format?
Right.
Can you really replicate that using just, the phone you've got in your pocket?
That's exactly the mission. The Xpan, it's famous because it used 35mm film, but exposed two frames side by side.
Right, like a super wide negative.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that resulted in this ultra-wide image with a really dramatic aspect ratio, 65 by 24.
65.24. That sounds severe.
It is. It's very cinematic, almost like a narrow slit, really different from what your phone usually gives you.
Yeah.
And our source material for this dive is a great set of notes someone put together. It details the practical steps and, importantly, the actual math you need to nail that 65.24 look using standard mobile hardware and maybe a bit of simple automation.
Okay, so it sounds like someone really dug into this. And before we get to the how, the notes jump right into the obvious first try, right? The one that didn't work.
Yeah, the most obvious path. Just look for a phone brand that says it has an Xpan mode or some kind of special panorama feature built in.
Easy way out.
Pretty much. Kind of the consumer approach versus, let's say, a more technical one. So initial searching found a few phones claiming things like super wide panorama or cinematic mode.
Okay, sounds promising maybe.
You'd think so, but when tested, the results were, frankly, disappointing, consistently so. They either, stitched multiple photos together.
Which can look messy.
Right, you often get artifacts, visible seams, weird distortions, or the other thing they did was just apply a sort of rough crop. Not standard, not precise, felt more like applying a filter than actually replicating the Xpan format.
So just a gimmick, basically.
Largely, yeah. A marketing feature rather than a precise photographic tool.
So why is that? Why do those advertised features miss the mark when it comes to that specific Xpan look?
Well, it comes down to precision. That Xpan ratio is absolute.
Right.
65 units wide for every 24 units high, period.
Right.
A phone maker's panorama, it's usually designed more for flexibility, something marketable. It's often about filling the phone screen horizontally.
Making things look wide on the display.
Exactly. Whereas the Xpan look is about a very specific, almost restrictive visual constraint. You absolutely need the exact geometry, not just a soft, stretchy gimmick. And that failure, that realization that the built-in stuff wasn't going to cut it, that's what pushed the investigation away from software features and back towards, well, using the hardware you already have, specifically the lenses.
Okay, let's follow that thread.
Yeah.
Because this is where the real detective work happens in these notes, uncovering something key about the hardware the user already had. The aha moment wasn't finding some new app, was it? It was realizing their current phone, even an older one, had this one crucial feature.
Yeah, an often overlooked one, a built-in ultra-wide angle lens.
A little lens makes all the difference.
It's the absolute key. The linchpin. See, to get that extreme 65.24 ratio by cropping, you have to start with an image that contains way more information than the final picture will use, especially vertically.
Okay, that makes sense.
A standard phone lens, even the main one, it just doesn't capture a wide enough view. If you tried to crop that much vertically, you lose essential parts of your scene horizontally. The ultra-wide gives you that extra canvas to work with.
Got it. And this leads us to what the notes distilled down as the core solution. Really elegant, actually. A simple two-step Xpan formula.
Exactly. Step 1, capture the widest possible scene you can. Use that ultra-wide angle lens.
Okay, widest view possible.
Step 2, crop the resulting image. But not just any crop. Crop it down to the precise, mathematically calculated Xpan aspect ratio of 65.24.
Simple, but the devil's in the details, I imagine. Let's dig into step 1 first, that base capture. Getting the widest canvas seems critical. What were the specs on the ultra-wide lens used in these notes?
Yeah, the specs are important here. We're talking about solid specs, maybe not bleeding-edge flagship stuff, but perfectly adequate. It was an 8-megapixel sensor, a very wide 120-degree field of view, and an f2.2 aperture.
That 120 degrees sounds like the key part.
It really is. That's your safety net. It means the lens is just gulping in spatial information horizontally and vertically, which is good because we're about to throw away a lot of the vertical stuff.
Right. And the notes also mentioned the capture mode was important. They preferred shooting in the camera's full mode. What's that about?
Yeah, full mode. That's crucial because it tells the camera to use the maximum sensor area that corresponds to the phone's native screen ratio.
Okay, so it maps to the screen shape.
Essentially, yes. In this specific case, the phone screen had a 19.5.9 aspect ratio, which is, already pretty wide by modern standards.
Wider than the old 16.9.
Definitely, but still absolutely nowhere near the extreme 65.24 we need. So the actual image file coming out of that ultra-wide lens, when shot in full mode, ended up being 364 pixels wide by 1,504 pixels high.
364 by 1504?
Correct. And those dimensions perfectly match that 19.5.9 screen ratio, that 3264 by 1504 image. That's our starting canvas, our raw material.
Okay, so we have this wide-ish image, 19.5.9, but we need to get to 65.24, which is dramatically wider, or rather shorter vertically.
Exactly. It feels much, much flatter.
And since the phone's built-in cropping tools probably don't have a preset for 65.24, right? They usually have like 16.9, 1.1, maybe 4.3.
Yeah, you're not going to find 65.24 in a standard menu.
So the source notes had to go back to basics, pure geometry.
That's where you have to get precise. You really can't just eyeball this one. The difference between, say, a common 21.9 cinematic crop and the specific 65.24 Xpan look is actually quite noticeable visually. It has a different feel.
Okay.
So we absolutely have to calculate the exact height, let's call it h, that perfectly matches our image width, w, to maintain that precise ratio.
So if we're keeping the width the same 300 and 264 pixels, because we don't want to zoom or shrink the image horizontally,
Right, hit the full width.
then the calculation is purely about figuring out how much height we need to chop off.
Precisely. The core math is, thankfully, really simple once you know the target ratio. It's just defined by the formula. The height, h, you need equals the width, w times 24, then divided by 65.
H equals w times 24 over 65.
That's it.
Okay, let's run the numbers quickly for everyone listening using that starting image size. Our width W is 264 pixels.
Right. So you take 3,264, multiply it by 24.
Okay.
And then divide that result by 65. And the answer you get, the calculated height h needed for that perfect Xpan ratio, is 1,205 pixels.
1205. Wow. Okay, so let's visualize that. We started with an image that was 264 pixels wide and 1,504 pixels high.
Uh-huh.
The math tells us we need to end up with an image that's 264 pixels wide, but only 1,205 pixels high.
Right.
So visually what's happening is we're keeping the entire horizontal span of the ultra-wide shot, but we're slicing off. Let's see. 1,504 minus 1,205. That's 299 pixels of vertical information.
Exactly, 299 pixels gone.
And presumably you'd want to cut that evenly. Like from the top and bottom.
Ideally, yes. For a centered crop, you'd trim roughly half of that, about 150 pixels from the top, and the other half, about 149 pixels from the bottom. That gives you that distinctive, severe letterbox look, perfectly centered.
That visual makes perfect sense now. The ultra-wide lens gives you the generous width.
The spatial raw material.
Right, and then the precise math applies that very specific Xpan constraint, that vertical squeeze.
And you can see why step one, using the ultra-wide, is so vital. If you didn't have that extra vertical information captured initially, then cutting off almost 300 pixels of height would just butcher the composition. You'd lose critical stuff. But because the ultra-wide captured such a huge vertical field of view, too, the frame still holds together. It still feels complete, even after that really aggressive vertical crop.
Okay, but quick question that popped into my head, something the notes might have touched on. Ultra-wide lenses, especially on phones, they can have distortion, right? Like bending lines near the edges. Does that mess up the precise Xpan framing?
That's a really good point, and definitely something photographers need to consider. Yes, phone ultra-wides almost always have some barrel distortion. Straight lines near the edge can look curved.
Right.
But there are a couple things working in our favor here. First, that extreme 65.24 crop. It often naturally cuts away the very top and bottom edges of the frame, which is where distortion is usually worst.
So the crop itself helps mitigate it.
It often does, yeah.
Okay.
And second, the notes do suggest that before you even apply the final 65.24 crop, you can use standard lens correction tools. Most decent photo editing software, even on mobile sometimes, has profiles to automatically straighten out the distortion from common lenses.
Okay, so you'd correct distortion first, then apply the precise crop.
Exactly. So the distortion is like a manageable hurdle. It's not a deal breaker for this technique.
That makes sense. Okay, so we've got the concept, the capture, the math. Now let's talk about actually doing it. Calculating 3264 by 1205 once is fine, But manually cropping dozens of photos like that sounds tedious.
Wow, incredibly tedious. And prone to errors, too. You might accidentally nudge it a pixel off.
Right. So this moves us into the practical side. How do you make this precise process efficient? How do you automate it?
Yeah, efficiency is really the key to making this useful, not just a theoretical exercise. The source material definitely stresses this. It moves the whole process away from fiddly manual adjustments in phone apps and towards automation.
Using what? Like command line tools?
Exactly that kind of thing. The notes detail using pretty standard, widely available image processing commands. You probably have them if you use Linux or Mac OS or can get them on Windows. Things like identify that's a tool to check the starting dimensions of your image file.
Okay, confirms you have 3264 by 1504.
Right. Then convert, which is part of the ImageMagick suite usually, to actually perform the crop. And the crop command or option within convert lets you specify the exact dimensions, 3264 by 1205, and crucially, tell it to make it a centered crop.
So this is where it gets a bit more technical, but it's about applying existing tools in a smart way.
Absolutely. It's not about inventing something new. It's about writing a precise recipe using tools that already exist. It's leveraging knowledge, not buying a gimmick.
And the final step mentioned in the notes was integrating this.
Yeah, the author took the logical next step. They wrapped up that precise centered cropping logic into a little script or a subcommand for their own personal command line tool they called Fotolab.
Ah, so they made it a repeatable utility.
Exactly, turning the arithmetic and the command sequence into something you can just run instantly. So instead of opening an app, selecting a tool, typing numbers, checking it, for every single photo.
Which would take forever.
Right. Now the user can just point the script at a whole batch of ultra-wide photos and boom, instantly, perfectly cropped, 65.24 Xpan style images come out the other end, guaranteed precision every time.
And this really brings us to the core takeaway for you, the listener. It powerfully demonstrates that you don't necessarily need that $1,000 vintage camera or even a specific feature advertised on the latest phone.
Not at all.
You can achieve these sophisticated, very specific photographic effects like the Xpan's unique look by smartly combining two things you likely already possess.
First, the raw image data captured by the ultra-wide lens that's probably already on your phone.
And second,
applying precise external control through mathematics and maybe a little bit of automation.
it's about understanding what your hardware can do, not just what the marketing says it does.
Precisely. Stepping away from the advertised features, looking at the actual sensor output specs, and then applying your own precision. That's how you transform a generic consumer device into a much more specialized, targeted photographic tool. It's quite empowering, actually.
So, to quickly recap that journey for everyone. First step, ignore the marketing gimmicks for panorama modes. They're probably not precise enough.
Right. Dismiss the easy answers that don't work.
Second, use your phone's ultra-wide lens. Shoot in a mode like full to get the biggest possible starting image, something like that 19.5.9 ratio we talked about.
Get that big canvas.
Third, use the simple formula height to width 24, 65 to calculate the exact vertical pixel dimension you need for the 65.24 ratio based on your image's width. Like we found, 1205 pixels high for a 3264 pixel wide image.
Do the math. It's crucial.
And fourth, apply that precise centered crop, maybe using automation tools if you're doing it often, to get that final 3264 by 1205 image.
Nail the execution.
Okay. And finally, as we wrap up, a thought for you to maybe play with using this newfound capability.
Yeah, something to explore. We usually associate ultra-wide lenses, and especially panoramic formats like this, with big, sweeping landscapes or maybe cityscapes, right?
Totally. That's
Yeah.
the classic use.
But now that you have this tool, this ability to impose that very specific, very severe 65.24 crop with mathematical precision, think about applying it to subjects that aren't landscapes, subjects that typically rely more on vertical space.
Like what? Portraits.
Exactly, or maybe interior shots of rooms, or even still life. What happens to the story, the composition, the feeling of a portrait when you force it into that extreme horizontal frame?
You'd lose a lot of the person vertically.
You would. You're dramatically restricting the vertical dimension. And by doing that, you force the viewer's eye to scan side to side, maybe focusing on context or expression within that narrow band. It creates a completely different kind of visual tension, a different narrative, just through that constraint.
That's a fascinating challenge. Taking a tool meant for openness and using its restriction to create a new perspective on something intimate.
Gives you something new to try with the camera kit you already carry around.
A truly compelling thought. All right, that's all the time we have for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.
For pleasure.
We'll catch you next time.